Hello, I'm your host, Leonard Duncan. Welcome to a new episode of ATV-TALK and Motorsports Podcast. Please join us every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We bring you interviews with industry professionals, live events, live news about the motorsports industry in every episode. Enjoy the show. Hey everybody, it's Leonard Duncan here, your host of ATV-TALK. I've been talking about this for years and years and years about where the ATV industry started and some of the things that, maybe not everybody knows. How I got into the industry. I was actually born into it. My father worked at a Honda dealership, in the early 70s, and that's when the US 90s came in. But I wanted to break it down. So all the boys and girls out there riding their four-wheelers thinking that, the industry started when Honda and Kawasaki and Can-Am and everybody were racing, four-wheelers, in the mid 2000s. And that was the greatest time ever. Well, there is a whole history before that that got us started in the ATV industry. So three-wheelers being, a portion of it, but I got my first ride on an ATC 90 when I was 4 years old in 1970. My dad brought one home from the Honda dealership, which everybody knows as Motor World today, which was Valley Motorcycle Sales back then. And, he gave me a ride on it, back when helmets were an option and people were just thought that this was just a three-wheeler that was just big balloon tires and popped over logs and all kinds of stuff. Well, we popped over a log and my dad turned it upside down and he held it up with his hands and feet and I crawled out from underneath him and no injuries, no pain, no gain. Nothing hurt, all good. My grandmothers were both watching at the time and they were kind of pissed at my dad, but it happens. It started a lifelong passion for me, being involved in the ATV industry. Nor did I know that it would evolve to here and I would be here this long. But it's a lot of fun. I've met a lot of great people, done a lot of cool things, but it's not about me. It's about the evolution of where our industry comes from. So if you really want to get into it, and you think back, oh, it started here or there. Well, roughly 1961, 1965, there was a three-wheeler made, a Jigger AATV. Jerry Rand, Tricart Honda, Tricart made it. And I don't think it was a very big deal. I haven't seen another one of them. I only have seen pictures on the internet. But little unique design, but hey, it was a start, right? We were getting into the off-roading. We were starting to explore the great outdoors, all the areas that people only went in, Jeeps or could walk or ride horses. Now they were starting to get other vehicles to experience this terrain and go out to places that nobody had ever gone before. So the Jigger was out there and wasn't as mobile as the US 90 when it came in 1969. That's when it came to the United States at the dealer show. They were numbered US 90. I believe there were 130 of them, talking to professionals and experts in the industry at the time, people that know more about some of that history because they were actually adults when I was doing it, when I was just a little kid. But I'm trying to, do my best to bring this information to you guys because we've forgotten so much that you take it for granted that these four-wheelers are the greatest things ever when they're evolution. They're not what we started with. We started with no suspension and big fat balloon tires that bounced and, we went 35 miles an hour. And you look at, the very, very first videos and everything are are pretty funny, of the ATV. Uh, it's kind of funny that my dad tells stories about, they brought those things in, and Joe Phillips, Big Al's race team, at one point in the 70s, uh, would was working as in the sales department, and he would ride that thing on the sidewalk in front of the shop, popping wheelies. My dad said it took, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and they had one back there pulling the top end off, putting a bigger piston in it to see if they could make it go faster. Uh, where you take other models from Hondas and match them up and bore it out, put it in there with rings and a different head gasket and go to town, because the motors were a little more basic then, and you could get away with some of that stuff. So it was pretty great. And they had everything in stock because they were a Honda dealer, uh, making them faster. So the evolution of where it all started, with that US 90, um, they thought the first ATVs could float on water because they had those big balloon tires. Well, what happened is most of the time they would turn upside down, and the tires would float and the rest of the ATV was underwater. But I mean, that was kind of cool. Uh, the first races that we have recorded, I'm sure that there might be something else around the country that we don't have records of, but like in 1970, at Speedway 117, they're talking about the very first ATC race. It might have been 71, but this is where most of your factory Kawasaki and Honda riders came from, were in this area, this Southern California area. Um, Marty Hart came from Louisiana. Some other guys came from other places because they had races back there. But your population of most of everything that was going on in racing at the time was happening here in Southern California. El Cajon, was the biggest thing since sliced bread, in the motorcycle industry. And the ATC industry was growing also because of it in the 70s and 80s, um, at an astronomical rate. The 90 went from the balloon tires to a steel wheel, knobby, still straight axle, no suspension. They went from a 90 to a 110. These modifications, I remember watching them cut the high low speed case off. They were adapting different transmissions into them, putting clutches in there from different models, because a lot of the stuff from Honda back then was universal. It would all fit together. I think Mr. Honda made it that way. It was better for manufacturing. It was cheaper, and they were doing a great job. The stuff was pretty good quality back when people talk shit about Japanese products. Well, it was good quality. They were getting better and better and better all the time. Some of what you see coming out of China, but there was a better capitalist, pro-America stance versus where we are with China, which is anti-American, and they're not building companies that we can build on. At least I don't believe they are. I mean, so there's a lot of different degrees to where this history evolved from. You have companies like Danny's Machine Works and 3B Lightning and Power Roll. You have Curtis Sparks came from the 185 industry, the 185S industry into the 200s. Um, you know, there's so many different avenues that I could take. I almost wish that I had a partner of era to talk with, because they could bring up some of the points that I've missed. Most of these companies that we were talking about started in the garage, and you didn't have big shops like you have today. You have guys with what you would call archaic tools or primitive tools now, making parts for these machines. We didn't have the same casting. We didn't have the same molding opportunities with the plastics and with the aluminum and things like that. It was a more of a cut it, weld it, grind it, and make it fit type scenario versus what you see today with products that are, you know, CNC machined or they're cast because the casting processes are so much better. Some of the rubbers and plastics that they can mold today would have made the so much better in that era, if you could imagine. Um, the riders of that era didn't do it for money. Well, let's take it back. The riders of the early 70s up until the beginning of the 80s, they did it for just pure love of riding ATVs, whether you're out in the dunes or racing. They were developing their own brand of how to do it, ingenuity with different kinds of tires. Like you go to the first ATV race and everybody's on the balloon tires, and then somebody comes out with lawnmower tires on the back. Then everybody's got lawnmower tires. So that's how that started. By the second or third race, everybody's on lawnmower tires, and then you couldn't get lawnmower tires because they couldn't make them fast enough. So there were some issues with that. In abundance too. Today, you have everything that you want at your fingertips. You can just get on the phone, get on the internet, bam, it's right there. It wasn't like that back then. You had to go physically to shops and find what you wanted because it wasn't available without that. And guesswork, there was a lot of guesswork involved in this era of building these 110s. You came with, they finally started putting front suspension on them. So the forks that they would use, what model they would use, they would adapt a brake to it. Usually hydraulic, sometimes it was drum, depending on where you were in the country or what model you disassembled to steal your brake system off of. Rear suspension was a little bit there for the 110s, but not very much. They built suspended ATC 70 frames that came in the later 80s, 90s, more the later 80s. Didn't go really big time until this era. Now they freaking love that design and it expanded on it and made it better in the modern day era. But when it was ready, not a lot of people did it because it was kind of expensive for its time frame. You look at Suzuki had their LT 125. That was the first four-wheeler, and it was more of a utility machine. You look at all of your three-wheelers throughout the time frame when the three-wheelers were huge. Farming equipment, you big reds, they would tow trailers, they made these things huge and strong and durable, and these engines would run forever. There's a lot of them are still out there working today, and you can still buy parts for some of them. And Mr. Honda overbuilt them so they would live way longer than anybody expected. That's why you still see some of it happening in modern days, riding an archaic three-wheeler that, its best years are way behind it, but it still functions and it still works. So why not work it? That led us up into, we get into the 80s with 81, 82 three-wheelers coming out. Now Honda's involved in racing. Yamaha's a little bit involved, not much, but a little. Kawasaki's starting to take some interest. And you bring in your factories and everything kind of exploded into a larger scene when we went to the 250 models. You rolled into like fairground races. They were making money. The development of the 250Rs from Japan and the work that they were doing here in the States and the conversions. So your hybrids started back in the 70s. They didn't start, everybody thinks the hybrids started when they took the four-stroke motors and put them in, you know, Lager chassis or roll chassis or Walsh chassis. No, that's not when the hybrids deal started. It started when they were putting 750cc engines in ATC 90 frames or things like that. So, or 125 engines, liquid cooled 125 engines in 9110 chassis, or building special chassis for these machines to race in the three-wheeler classes, to race against these slow archaic four strokes. Yeah, and they were fast. The two strokes were faster, but the four strokes were pretty good and held their own for a number of years. Unfortunately, technology, the two stroke took over, and that's when the 250Rs 81 82 came out. They were a rage, everybody had one. Then the 83 came out and they're like, oh wow, this is even better. 84 was similar but made some upgrades, and 85 hit, and then the race was on and it was over. Liquid cooled, the suspension, the Pro Link, I mean, it was on the earlier models, but you had Husky trying to develop a three-wheeler. If their three-wheeler would have taken off, would Husky be the brand that everybody followed? That was a pretty nice machine that they put together. I've never physically seen it. I've only talked to the guys that got to ride it, and talked with them a little bit, had them on our earlier shows. So you can go back and talk to them about, or listen to what they had to say about them. The things that they put on their machine that Honda eventually copied, because it made the machine better with better suspension, upgrading the overall ATC to be just better and better and better. You roll into one of the reasons why we have so many problems with our sport. And I know this is a fast overview, so I apologize for that. Uh, it was a lot of fun in that era. I mean, you guys have no idea. I was still a kid for a lot of this stuff, um, but meeting guys like Dean Sundahl when he was young and super fast, and getting to meet Marty Hart when he was, going to the dump with a straw hat on, never having a clue who the guy was face to face. Having my dad tell me stories about him knowing who Curtis Sparks was, because Curtis was building engines and my dad was selling him engine parts. So these stories and this circle of where we are and where we've come from, but we're so tied together in so many ways. Some of the guys back east now that are running some of the shops, uh, they grew up following and watching a lot of this. Some of them were racers at that time, and then they developed into builders because they worked on their own stuff. But the boom didn't start when 450s came out, or when we went from two strokes to four strokes. The boom started way back, and you guys missed out on an amazing era. The writers and the people that were doing it back then, and the developers, there wasn't a lot of money. It was just pure desire to make the machines better, to create. And you'd show up in a pickup truck with no easy ups, no tarps, no tents, and go race, and then drive, a day and a half back home so you could be to work on Monday morning, or drive however long you had to get home, and you did it for $5. There was no money in it, until the Honda guys and the Kawasaki guys got in, and that only lasted for 5 or 6 years before that kind of went away, as the media got involved, and personal responsibility became non-existent in the ATV world, and media people lied. Honda didn't back the three-wheeler properly. They didn't set up the industry standards like they were supposed to. That hurt the three-wheeler world. Where would we be at right now? You look at motorcycles. If we were still riding three-wheelers, where would the evolution be? You know, the long travel, the upside down forks, just the way they were building some of the experimental 200cc machines where the brake was in the center of the carrier instead of on the outside. You know, there's so many variations of some of this stuff, and the pictures aren't there. I wish we could find those pictures and people would post them so that you could see there was a lot of development going on and evolution, and it was happening at a just exponentially, extremely fast rate, especially in the aftermarket world. The factory guys were a little slower. They had to make sure that it was safe and economical to build. That's where the 2-year cycle, same model, little upgrades, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86. And then they stopped making three-wheelers because of some bad news reports and bad accusations that they were unsafe. Well, we rode tricycles for years, right? I did, you did, everybody did, you know, in our era. I'm functioning just fine riding three-wheelers. You know, we drank out water out of the hose too. Did you? Didn't hurt me. Probably made us better because we got real good water then. But that's neither here nor there as far as where we are with it. You young guys and ladies, you have no idea how really cool it was to grow up in that era where you got to see the three-wheelers roll through, and then the 85 LT 250, the coolest thing ever to hit the market. Not, it was cool, but it wasn't the coolest thing. But Suzuki was the first to hit the market with the four-wheeler. It was more of a utility machine. It came out, I believe, in 83. So it was out a couple years before the 85 came out. Everybody wants to say it's the first one. Well, it wasn't. It was like a 125. What really revolutionized the four-wheeler industry was the TRX 250R in 86. That machine just started a whole revolution on where we were going to go with four-wheelers. You know, TRX 250Rs still today are one of the dominant forces in our industry as far as what we build, what parts are built for it. They stopped manufacturing those in 89 due to the three-wheeler lawsuit issue. I think it was voluntary. There's no ban. There was never a ban. Three-wheelers are not banned. You can sell race three-wheelers that you build now. You close course. You can't build a production unit that you'd sell to the general public, but you can build one and go race it and sell it to your buddy, or you can sell a race model to someone, but you can't build a recreational one. Doesn't mean that you can't buy it for racing, race one time, and then use it for recreational. But you see where that's gone. Backing up quite a ways, when you get to the 250R craze, where Suzuki had a race team, Honda had a race team, Kawasaki tried, but those poor guys, they just blew it. They had a great three-wheeler. I think it was a little unreliable, but it was still fast. I mean, they were super fast when they would run. They were faster than the Hondas. They just weren't as durable. They didn't do things quite as good as the Honda. Jimmy White will argue that to the death, that I'm full of it, but that's okay, Jimmy. I still love you, brother. But the Honda is just a better bike. It was better engineered. It was longer lasting, and any knucklehead with a hammer and a wrench could make a Honda run. where with some of these other models, you had to finesse them. You really had to be a better quality mechanic and know how to work on them. Fuel was better back then. We'll be getting into fuel. Uh, you're probably going to get a second episode of this because there's so much here and so much to talk about. Uh, the golden age of racing, which where was that? Was that in the beginning of the ATV world, or back in the 80s when we raced 250Rs and LT 250Rs, rolling out into roll design and Lager building chassis, then eventually Walsh and Aaron's and some others, making chassis for the 250Rs. And long travel suspension and shock technology with zero preload and Axis, PEP, Elka, Elka. Obviously, we started with Oleans and showy stock shocks. Uh, it's come so far. I remember Doug Gus coming out to a national. I don't exactly remember what year. Brand new stock shocks on his 250R with stock A arms and pipe porting, and pretty much put the hurting on all the boys that had some of this stuff that technically wasn't long travel, but it was wider with different shocks, from different shock manufacturers to make it better, make it handle better. And Gus was a beast, and he just went out there and smoked them. I don't need all that crap. I got these great freaking OEM 250R shocks that work perfect, and they were good shocks at the time. They're non-rebuildable, and they've seen a better day. But it was a lot of fun to see the talent that came through the 250R days. There's so many guys. I mean, you had 15, 18 guys on the starting line that could win a race or could win the race, whether it be a motocross race, whether it could be a TT race. And desert racing was huge. A little harder, still just as many guys racing in Baja. The teams were bigger. The quality of some of the stuff that they raced was catching up with the times. People hadn't figured out, quality of fuel. There was a lot of stuff that was being learned that we know we take for granted now. But the evolution of the sport, it was coming. The factories left, and it was the independents. The independent guys picked up the mantle and carried it. Companies like Sparks and CT and Duncan Racing. These are the guys that put it on their back and carried it and made it happen. There's others. If I missed you, I'm sorry. Lager, Roll, a couple others that Hinson. These guys all made the industry So when you get to the era where the four strokes came in the 2010 range, 2009, 2008, 2006, basically, you had Suzuki come in with their fuel injected machine. Um, they hurt the independents because none of the independent guys that had carried the load and did all the work got the nod. Um, that was kind of bad. 05, 04, Honda had a traditional, not one of the originals, but pretty dang close. Baldwin Motorsports, with Tim Farr, which was great that Honda had picked them and worked with them. That Honda, what it lacked in some areas made up for other areas because it won races instantly. I know that it won on the West Coast with the Work Series. It won in the desert with Best in the Desert and Score immediately. Works. It won motocross. The Yamaha in 04 was supposedly a better machine. The magazine guys destroyed the Honda in the magazines. But if the Yamaha was so great, why didn't it win? I'm not talking about the one today. I'm talking about the carbureted one. It just never became the machine. Now in the woods, you had the Suzuki, the LT 450. That machine had a great run, and so did the Yamaha, the carbureted model, and the Yamaha. They both worked great in the woods. Bill Balance won a number of championships with the carbureted one. He won some, I believe, with the fuel injected model. Then, the Suzuki went out there and won, and it won for 6 years, maybe 7. I think 6 or 7. And then the Yamaha started dominating. I don't believe the modern day Honda 450s won a title in XC. In the old days they did, but not in the modern day. So you're rolling into an era in the 2004-5. The factories are starting to pop in. 6 with Suzuki. Then you have Kawasaki coming in there. You have, as it rolls forward into the years, you get Can-Am and KTM. Neither one of those guys, everybody loves that KTM. If that KTM is so great, why didn't it win anything? It didn't win nothing because to me it was just junk. But that's just my opinion. There was guys like Tim Farr, dude. You respect the guy; he's freaking awesome. Shane Hitt, both those guys love that bike. Doug Eichner likes his. Personally, I can't stand him. Don't like to work on them. Didn't like the way they handled. Didn't like anything about them. The Can-Am, you needed a whole race crew just to make the thing live. But it won some championships, won some races, and then when the money that it took to keep Can-Am rolling, it disappeared. So I'm giving you a rough, quick, schooling on it. I wish that it didn't quite go this fast, but there's just so many cool stories about the time and 250Rs racing in the 4-stroke class, and the battle between what size 450 is. It going to be a 400 or a 450? That's going to compete with the 250R. Do we get to go to a larger bore, a 300 kit, or even bigger? Those arguments went on for a long time. The stadiums back in the 80s really, really helped us when we got to race Mickey Thompson's. The last one was in 95, but through the early 90s and late 80s when they would run the Mickey Thompson stuff, it was great. And I don't mean to go back in time, but if you ever really want to know when ATV racing was at its best, is when the three-wheelers were racing at the fairgrounds and the purses were 40 grand and there was no AMA. The AMA got in there and ruined it. They can be mad at me all they want. They don't pay me a penny. They don't have anything to do with me. They're not stopping me from doing what I'm doing. But I don't necessarily agree that the AMA should have a stranglehold on the ATV industry. Um, they took a lot of the sponsor money, and some of the money they get today goes to the motorcycles and not to the ATVs, or it goes to some other form of promoter that shouldn't get the money. But that's a whole nother argument for another day that we could have. Um, the evolution of these machines is pretty incredible if you follow it all the way back. The Honda, the 0405, you can say that it was slow. Well, it won immediately. The 06 up that they stopped making in 14, it didn't have the same quality as far as the transmission wasn't as good. The power was better, but they hurt themselves with not making sure that the tranny was good. Yamaha, when they came out in 09 with their fuel injected bike, it had a couple issues, but it doesn't anymore. It has great transmission. You can upgrade the clutch. It's fuel injected. There's a device that you can put on there that allows you, the consumer, to tune it. If you get into these hybrid motors or these really hot motors, you can go to somebody and get them tuned. Uh, the thing that hurts most everybody in the ATV world, whether you're restoring your old two strokes, your Banshees, which I didn't even cover Banshees very much, they're a sand dune icon that anybody that ever went to the sand dunes wanted to ride a Banshee because it was so cool. Uh, the LT 500 was its competitor in the day, and who's faster, the big bore single or the twin? Who's going to go up the hill faster? Generally, the twin won at the hill, and the 500 won on the flats. It was just a better. They just had their area that they worked on. LT 500s, you needed a soft hand. A very smart technical person needed to work on an LT 500 because it wasn't built as good as the Banshee or the Honda, even though the Honda was so good, anybody could work on it. And there was a lot of unqualified people working on those 250Rs, and they got them to run. And some of them went really fast, but they still should have never touched them. That being said, most of those companies, most of those people are gone in the industry today. As you roll into the modern day stuff, the technology with some of the little kids' bikes, because of government, and I'm going to blame us, the people in the industry, for not fighting the government enough, not making sure that we're policing ourselves, and making sure that you're not out doing the wrong things. You're not letting your 9-year-old ride your 450. I mean, unless he's 6 foot tall and weighs 200 pounds, it's ridiculous. You put an 11-year-old that weighs 60 pounds on your Banshee and you want him to race the hill. Okay, I'm sorry, bro. That's against the deal. You're not supposed to do that. It's dangerous for that kid because he can't control it. You may think it's cool. You may think he can, but this is why we have all these laws and regulations now, because people didn't take accountability when their children got hurt, when they threw them on these machines, and then they got injured. They wanted to blame Honda, they wanted to blame Yamaha, they wanted to blame whoever. No, you did it, you bought it, you threw your leg over it. It's one of the things I learned from my European friends is when you threw your leg over, it was all you. You weren't suing the manufacturer because you got hurt. You chose to get on it. It's your fault. Three-wheelers are great. Maybe some of the advertisements made them look easier and safer than they were. Well, if you're going the speed that you're supposed to, riding the proper gear, the odds of you crashing went way down. But when you started being an extreme rider, or you put your kid on there with no shoes and a shorts and a t-shirt and his helmet didn't fit, okay, I understand why he got hurt. You're the idiot that didn't take care of him. And yeah, I said that openly. And if you don't like it, too bad. I'm sorry. It's true. It's the same thing with everything that goes on that happens with people with skateboards and all these other things. Personal accountability has to come first. But we're off that topic and on back on to, the history and where the sport's going. Uh, as we've evolved into the modern day era, 2015, 16, 17, Yamaha's it. They make the two sport quads, a 450 and a 700. The Raptor 700 is a pretty cool machine. It's gaining popularity because there's nothing else. And it should, because it's a good bike, good motor, good strong motor. Your 450, your 09 to 26 YFZ 450R, outstanding machine. Handles good, has great upgrades. The aftermarket companies have come in and solved every problem that it ever had. And it had the least out of, I would say, any of your modern day 450s that were ever built. It had the least amount of issues. And most of the issues that it has came from the government. Yeah, there again, police the government, everybody, because the gas that you're getting, watch the episode on fuel, because you're going to learn that the fuel that you think you're getting and the fuel that a lot of you young people have been brought up on isn't the fuel you should be using, because it's not meant for these machines. But that's another era, another question. If you guys want to talk more about this, reach out in the comments, send me information. My email's out there, at ATV-TALK podcast, on social media. It's ATV_talk podcast on Instagram. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on everywhere. My email, my phone number's out there. We want to bring more information on there. And I know I missed and did a, kind of a fast review of everything, but it started back in the 60s. And some of you kids, your dads weren't even born in the 60s. They were born in the late 90s, it takes somebody that is in their late 50s, early 60s to even know some of the history. You've got to go back into the 70s, maybe even into the 80s for people that really know. My dad's 90, and he was in his 30s when this happened, when these came out, and he worked, built a career and business on, the back of what some people call a joke, an archaic ATC 90, 185S's, 200X's, ATC 250Rs. I mean, the whole industry was built off of those. So don't forget that, that 450 Yamaha that you're riding, or that Raptor 250, the evolution came, it was a hard fought evolution. And a lot of people had to learn a lot of things to make those machines better. And it all stemmed from the early models, just like everything. Cars didn't evolve to where they are today instantaneously. They had to go back and learn how to do it. Well, you young people should go back and learn a little bit of the history on where these things come from and why it's built this way, why it's not built the other way. You see people coming out with electrical parts for 250Rs. Well, they didn't work back when we tried them then, and they don't work now. No, you think they do, they didn't. You have people making suspension components for 450R Hondas. They've already perfected it. You're making something that you're not making it any better, because the guys like Lager and Roll and Walsh have already made it better. And these guys are the best. Not trying to lose your interest, but there's some really, really talented, smart guys have already made the parts that work for them and moved on. And you can still buy them. You can still buy parts from them, or for them. There's linkages for Hondas out there made by multiple different people. Elka, Axis, PEP. These are the shocks that you're going to buy for this stuff. And these shock manufacturers are all extremely talented. So you can go get them and put them on your machine and go ride them and make them better. You're just like your A arms, whatever A arm you want to pick. Everybody's got their soup. Mix it the way you want and go have a good time with it. Reach out to me so that we could possibly do this again and get a little more in detail. If you want to ask questions about a specific era, some years, maybe some events that happened, and talk about them so that you can understand them a little better. There were 24-hour races that we raced with 250Rs. There were 24-hour setups that we did with 450Rs. There were other models involved in them, but there were a lot of different things happened in the evolution of ATVs, ATCs. You see a lot of ATCs coming back in some of these races, where they'll race 350X. Very underrated machine. Great package. Rode good, made good power. Modern day, if you put upside down forks on something and get it to have similar geometry with a better motor, yeah, it's going to smoke that bike. But it's hard pressed to beat a good 350X that's been put together correctly. And there's some fantastic three-wheeler manufacturers that are out there putting stuff together today, where they're building race three-wheelers that actually function the way they're supposed to with forks and suspension. There's some conversion guys that are doing hybrid three-wheelers that are great. It all depends on what you're looking for. It's out there. You can find it. There's also the traditional guys that still build Banshees 250Rs, LT 250Rs, and TRX 250Rs. They're great, because they're still doing it. Not as many people will do it, but it's still happening. There's still a huge market for it. And we're learning that some of the things that we've learned in the past that made this model or these models of today work so good, we're adapting to some of these old two-strokes. And you'd be amazed that now they're going through the bumps way better. They handle way better. They turn, they jump. They have outstanding power. And in some areas, you're hard pressed to beat those old two-strokes because we've brought them back to life in such a way that the traction or the deficiencies they had are no longer deficiencies. And the four-strokes of today are like, whoa, didn't see that coming. As it blows by in a specific area of the course, you might even see a Banshee that's totally different than what you would have seen in the desert, back in the desert, with upgrades to suspension and rear end protection and motor builds. So keep an eye for some of that stuff. It's happening. I'm talking to people that are interested in building stuff like that. So episode 2 could be just a filler of the stories in the era that maybe we didn't talk about. And if you have stories, or if you have specific incidents that have happened, reach out to us. We'll be more than glad to talk about them and tell your stories for you. Maybe even some of you might even get to sit down and we could talk about that era together. There's so many great people that made our industry and developed it, were the pillars that you're resting on that you don't even know you are. Just like with so many things in the world that we're better today because of what happened then. And you young people, really you young people, aren't looking back enough to learn the history, to understand, to stop making mistakes in the future. But I'm going to leave it at that for you. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Look for more solo episodes. We're really going to have a discussion about some gas. I've been telling you for years that I wanted to do this. Well, I finally have done the research, and we're setting up the episode about fuel. The findings, you're not going to believe. I believe it, and I've known it all along. I just had to figure out how to prove it. And I believe we did. So make sure you look for that episode. It will be a lot of fun. And I know that there'll be critics. There's always critics. There's going to be critics to this episode. And that's okay. The more critics there are, the better, because then there's more cool stories and we can talk about it and hash it out. And, we're all right. It's okay. We're all right. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you very much for listening, and catch us on the next one. Remember, subscribe, like, share, and have a great time with it, just like we do. We love the ATV industry. We love the motorsports industry. So we have some other motorsports industry shows coming as well. So be looking for those also. Hello, I'm your host, Leonard Duncan. Welcome to a new episode of ATV-TALK and Motorsports Podcast. Please join us every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We bring you interviews with industry professionals, live events, live news about the motorsports industry in every episode. Enjoy the show.